Hey, good afternoon, shipmates. My name's Jim Green. I was not a plank owner on Yorktown. I was a follow-on guy that was one of the first replacement crew that came along. I was an operations specialist. I just wanted to do this video real quick so that we can get, just some information out there about this Libyan engagement that we took place in 1986. I'm going to just run through some of the things that took place during, after, and that stuff. The question came up on Facebook, on our Yorktown Association Facebook page, about were we first or was the Simpson first as far as doing a harpoon engagement with Standard Missile. Well, Simpson's engagement with the harpoon missile took place in April of '88, or basically 2 years after the Libyan event took place. It took place during Operation Praying Mantis, where she was either part of SAG B or SAG A, which had Wainwright. Wainwright, can't remember the other ones that were in there with her, but they had a couple of SAGs that were set up as far as the Gulf went, and she turned around because Samuel B. Roberts had been hit a couple of weeks beforehand with a mine. Operation Praying Mantis went down, and that's how they dealt with the situation. As far as what took place in the Libyan operations, and this is just to the best of my recollection, I'm not trying to be, some subject matter expert on it or anything here, but remember, we were down there, we'd gotten underway, and I can't remember if it was Naples or if we came out of Nice for this time that we went down, but I do remember one thing. When we went out there, we had a hell of a battle group, okay? We had the America, we had the Coral Sea, and we had the Saratoga, 3-carrier battle group out there. Sixth Fleet himself was underway on the Coronado. That was Frank Kelso at the time. CTF 60 probably hasn't been that big since World War II. Now, the time frame that I'm going to really talk about is around the 23rd of March in 1986. So we were underway. We all went down toward the line of death, which was 3230 North. And if you remember, the three that stayed down below the line of death the whole time that we were down there was Ticonderoga. One thing about Ticonderoga that people don't really understand, Ticonderoga at the time was having major CAS reps as far as your radar went. The Scott, which had the Desron on board. And let's see, who else was down there? Karen was down there, DD-970, our buddy, pretty much Yorktown sister ship, even though it's not the same class. So we all went down around there, and then the next day is when stuff started happening. And this was on OVL number 3, I believe. And I know Master Chief Joyce probably out there going, no, Gruff, you got this all wrong. But it was around 6 o'clock in the morning on the 24th of March of '86, when all of a sudden we heard the words, I looked around and I heard the words, Sam, 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 and it was Pat Joy and company over on the force consoles in CIC. And what had happened was the Libyans had launched against our assets that were down there doing a tactic called Blue Darter, which I'll get to in just a second. But what they'd done is they'd launched SA-5 missiles at our aircraft. Now, Blue Darter, here's what it was. We'd go down there because we were trying to, get a reaction from them. We'd have a couple of F-14s flying high, and then down underneath them, low, we'd have some F-18s down there with some weapons on board that could deal with anti-radiation missiles and stuff like that. So, and EA-6Bs up there jamming them as well. So that was called Blue Darter. It's really just to pull them off. Maybe they'll shoot at us and stuff. We get a little bit closer, bang. They actually shot at the F-14s. No big deal. F-14s turn, burn, head straight back up north, no problem. What happens at that point, though, is the F-18s come in down low. They launch the HARM missiles and hit the SA-5 site. So that's what we knew as far as that goes. They fired on the Tomcats, and we responded with a HARM. So they have decided at that point it's time to start doing some things. So at about 8 o'clock in the morning, this is still on the 24th, 2 MiGs come up from Benina, okay? Benina military aircraft, well, actually it's a civilian military aircraft down in Libya. And I remember Seth telling us over Net 15 that they'd been given orders to shoot down U.S. fighters. Okay, now, we had multiple E-2s up in the air because we had the 3 aircraft carriers out there, early warning E-2s. The E-2s got them on radar, took some 14s, two F-14s, went after them to intercept them. They got down there to them, and when they got down to them, they were at about 20,000 feet. What ended up happening is the F-14s determined that hostile intent had taken place. Hostile intent as far as their actions go, maneuvering between the aircrafts, the MiG-23s as well as the F-14s. Hostile intent had taken place, and so at that point, the Force Warfare Coordinator, as far as air goes, on board Yorktown, through Saratoga, as well as Frank Kelso over at 6th Fleet, determined that we were going to set air warning yellow weapons hold, which means it puts us in a posture to where if the fighters have to shoot, they can shoot, okay? So we were yellow and hold. And to be honest with you, that sort of sends a little chill up your spine while you're sitting there and watching this stuff go on. So a dogfight ensued, but just as these MiG-23s would get in the right position off of the F-14s, the MiG-23s would turn away and go back down toward the south. Now, they did that a couple of times, and they actually did turn south, continued going south, so no splashes, no F-14 engagement at that point. The next thing that happened was a couple of hours after that, they started getting some surface craft underway. And the surface craft that the Libyans were sending out at that point were Nanuchka patrol craft, La Combattante patrol craft, those types of ships that were, and Nanuchkas. Now, that afternoon, the first harpoon that was ever used as far as the surface engagement goes in a quote-unquote non-friendly environment was actually fired by the Richmond K. Turner. Okay, so we had the 3 aircraft carriers, 1, 2, 3, like this. Richmond K. Turner was over on the right flank of those 1, 2, 3, and I'm pointing north in this direction, was over on the right flank of these guys. She was sitting over there, and she got in contact with what they believed was a Nanuchka that was coming out that wanted to fire at our strike group. And so Richmond K. Turner fired the harpoon, and there are differing stories on it, but it's always been classified as far as a kill goes for Richmond K. Turner. So that's where the first harpoon engagement was ever done. So we're going to continue on later in that day, about 19:30 at night. The VF-34 off of America, which was A6 intruders, engaged a Libyan La Combattante that was maybe about 40 miles off the beach at that point. They destroyed it. They hit it with harpoon initially. That wasn't good enough. They came back around with VA-85, which was also off of America. They came around with Rockeye and hit them with Rockeye at the same time, so that destroyed that Nanuchka real well. At about 20:30 at night, okay, we go down again because now we've had our chance to sit back, take a look at what's going on. We go down and we do another Blue Darter mission run on CERT. But this time we went down, and what I'm going to call it in a heavy posture. We had F-14s, F-18s, A-7Es, as well as EA-6Bs up ready to rock and roll. They lit off the radars. The F-18s, the F-14s went high, got the enemy or the Libyans to light off the radars, which at that point the A-7Es just pelted them with harm missiles. And what the 14s did and everybody else did at that point, turned, went north, boot scoot, head back, see what would happen. And they were running, just to let you know, during the debriefings type of stuff, they were running at 100 feet off deck. Just as fast as they could come up through there. Okay, so a couple hours later, I was sitting SWS at the time, which is Surface Warfare Supervisor, typical job for an OS2. And I had this track that popped up, and it popped in, and it came in from the southeast, and it was going pretty fast. It was in excess of 20 knots, and we didn't hold it on the 55 radar or the Spook 9 radar at that point. So I went in, and a typical thing that we used to do back then, and it's not a good practice, but we drop it out and see if it came back. And our rule of thumb was if it drops out 2 times, guess what? If it comes back, it's real. Now, my problem is you're degrading the range as far as doing that. So your situational awareness isn't that good. So I don't recommend doing that. But here's the thing. It continued to come in. Lieutenant Cardwell was the SWIC at that point, and we were talking to the TAO, and I remember the XO was playing command officer at that point because he and the captain were standing port and starboard, like command officer of the day, and I think Lieutenant Commander Easton was sitting Alpha Whiskey at that point, Force Whiskey, and we also had on board Comcargo 4, which was Admiral Dunleavy. That's when Aegis cruisers from time to time would have the boss on board. And so we had, he wasn't on Saratoga, he was on board us. And the contact continued to close us. It got down to a range that was not satisfactory. We didn't know what it was. And there was one mention between the Spook 9 operators and the surface operators. Did they hold anything? And initially the Spook 9 operators said that they did. And then we kind of found out later maybe they didn't. I don't know. That's not for me to call. But what ended up happening was we set general quarters. We turned the ship and went to the northwest at maximum speed. Admiral Dunleavy and the captain came into CIC. I remember on Net 15 that one of the officers up at the front table said to another officer, I think we're getting ready to get waxed here. I also remember that the engagement was directed by the captain to fire the harpoons. Now, what had happened then, okay? I was smoking a cigarette. The ash from my cigarette fell into the valves of the OJ console that I was on. Old OSC is what we used to call it. Disabled the console. So Greg Mitchell, Marty Martinez, and Rick, OS1 Rick, and I can't remember, Rick Rogers. Between them, we got that console shut down, got the other console brought back up. We had a SWIG console for the engagement back then. It's not the SWIG 1A that you've got now that's got that beautiful display on it and stuff. And so our automatic interface in between the console and that system wasn't there, okay? So we get the system brought back up in the ASAC console behind us. I remember Marty and Rick and Greg Mitchell getting the other console up. We went to fire, and this is where, when you brought it up on Facebook about one was a dud, this is to the best of my recollection. I don't remember 100%, but this is to the best of my recollection. What had happened was when Lieutenant Cardwell turned the switches, because you got to turn the key first, and then you got to turn the switch. So when he turned the switch, it went booster armed, and where you're supposed to see missile enabled, another light key that'll come up, it went to dud, okay? And I think that he went to try to cycle it again, it went to dud the second time. So then what we did was we just time out, okay? We selected two other missiles, saw them come up as far as ready to go. They weren't the missiles that we wanted to fire. It just happened to be the next two on the block. Actually, they're the missiles we didn't want to fire because they're on the lower part of the launcher. So what ends up happening is booster arm missile enabled Bulldog away. Booster arm missile enabled Bulldog away. We fired two. Okay, now these two went on what's called a bearing only launch. It's a default system. So what happens is the missile goes up to 1,250 feet, comes back down toward cruise, and as it goes down toward cruise, the seeker turns on. So anything between the time that seeker turns on until it finds something on its radar that it gets two blips off from, okay, it's got to confirm it. It takes it, looks at it the first time, looks at it the second time, bang. That's your target for the RGM-84 3700 Seeker missile warhead, okay? So that's what the target is that we went after. Now, I'll go to what Tom said on Facebook. Tom Lemon, he's Signalman, excellent sailor. Tom said on there that he saw the flash at the other end. Now, a bearing-only launch, what happens is that thing's going to keep going until it finds something to blow up. Now, the maximum range on that missile that we had was around 65 miles in reality. So if Tom saw it flash, it hit something in there between that 15 and 20-mile mark would be my guess. I, to this day, really honestly think that we hit something that night. There's always been a debate out there, and if you look at the official records, they say that we disabled something. But what happened was Captain Anderson was smart enough to, as soon as the light of day went down the next morning, we went down there. And I remember being out on the flight deck looking around and stuff, and there was stuff floating around out there, and it kind of looked like mess decks, you know, the wide chairs that we got as far as the tables and stuff like that goes on the mess decks. It looked like stuff like that to me, and other things that were floating around in that area. So, folks, that's what I know about it. I just know that within 36 hours after that, we'd gotten a call from President Reagan as far as the radio goes. Our side got disabled because something went wrong, but President Reagan called us. It was a great time. A lot of good shipmates. And within 36 hours of then, we were back in port having beers. And that's kind of the way it went back then as far as our warfare type of things go. It was a pleasure to be able to tell you this story. And it was a pleasure to be on Yorktown. Have a great Christmas and a Happy New Year.